Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Issa Ismail, an Arab-American woman who transitioned in her early 20s and has recently detransitioned. She made a documentary, wonderfully produced, titled A Year in Transition, that explores her process, or actually documents her process of transition. And she has been doing a little bit of documenting about her detransition, but not as thoroughly. And so I'm very happy to have her on and get her insight into this process, what caused her to want to transition and what caused her to want to detransition. Her life experience is very unique. So I know you're going to get a lot out of it, and I'll get out of the way and allow you to meet, if you haven't already, Issa Ismail. I don't like being predictable, but I've done a number of interviews with detransitioners, and there's kind of an arc, like a general arc. I don't know if we've spoken about that previously. But I guess the first question is, where did it all begin?
Yeah. For me, I think what the greatest resource that I have is my documentary. I can't remember if you had watched it and went through all of the things that I've kind of put out there for people. But, you know, I didn't have the words maybe for it until I was a teenager. I would say about 17, 18 when I started meeting trans folks. But as a child, I was extremely gender fluid. I hung out with all genders. I wore all gendered clothing. I was just like a very like all around child. So I never really thought much into it. Like my family had just looked at me as like a tomboy, for example. And it wasn't until I think, like I was about 17 when I started to really question myself. And I think because, I had then come out as gay at the time. So my sexuality sprouted first when I was like, okay, I'm going to come out. These are the things that I'm going to do. I think like because of my idea of what relationships were, and that would be like very heteronormative. So like male, female, like masculine, feminine. And I always found myself attracted to more feminine people. And so that brought out my masculine energy a lot. And so I think that when I started dating and I started being in these relationships, I found myself in a more masculine gender expression and kind of, I would say sometimes a little bit more performative, because I was trying to maybe prove my masculinity as much as I could, given, my female body. And, just like a series of like thoughts and experiences and complex moments just led me to get to the point where I had thought hormones was going to be the best decision for myself, to maybe, help masculinize my body more, and kind of just be perceived as this more masculine person.
So it was kind of more of a turning up a dial rather than completely becoming a male, or...
Yeah, I would say that's like an accurate, way to like view it. Everything was so subtle, the tweaks that I would call them, of my gender and sexuality. They would change over time. Maybe they would go towards one binary or the other. But it wasn't like I'm going to wake up one day and I'm taking hormones, or, like when I decided to take hormones 3 years prior is when I had started to come out as trans. So it wasn't something that was like right on my mind the moment that I had come to terms with my identity at that time. Because I was nervous, I didn't really know what that life would look like. And a lot of the people that I dated identified as cis women, lesbians, or bisexual. So sometimes the scariness thought of me transitioning to be male, they wouldn't want to be with me. So when I was younger, I was very dependent on partnerships, as a lot of young people are, So that's, stopped me from doing it. not that they weren't supportive either. It was just my own mind blocking me. And then, yeah, I do remember the moment where I decided I was going to go to a therapist to now explore my gender. And when I reflect back on it, I think it's more of a body dysmorphia instead of gender dysphoria in a sense. Or maybe, there was some, but I would think it would lead more to the body dysmorphia. But I was trying on clothes, and it was like men's jeans and a men's shirt. And I was just looking in the mirror and nothing fit me right, no matter what size I had. And this was pre-surgery, pre everything. And I just like got to the point where I was like, I don't want to live like this anymore, because I was just so unhappy looking in the mirror, as not being able to see that masculinity in me. And then that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to seek out a therapist. And the therapist that I sought out was Dalton Connolly, who was in the documentary. That was the first therapist that I saw.
Could you talk about your relationship to the mirror? Was that always a prominent way of checking in with yourself and, I guess, concretizing your identity, who you were or how you presented, and what the mirror meant and did?
Yeah. I really like that you brought that question up, because I haven't really thought about the influence of my appearance as far as like looking in mirrors is actually a very huge part of my life. I am known for looking in mirrors a lot, actually. That's why I think it's interesting that you actually brought that up. When I was younger, I remember in high school always asking, does my hair look okay? How do I look? Does this fit right? To my friends. And obviously we get body issues in high school. Normally every kid does when they go through puberty. But my friends would make fun of me because they were always like, you're always asking us how you look. And I did to an extreme amount. And I was just a very insecure person. Even though I showed my confidence so much, I very much just like did what I wanted to do, made decisions and felt confident in those and things like that. But when it came to my appearance, I was really insecure. Even though, and not, in a conceited way, I was an attractive person. And I felt extremely insecure all the time. And I was bullied a little bit in high school too. So that could have added to it. But
did the bullying come from females or males more?
I would say more with females, but both. I was like really picked on. And it was for, so I'm Arabic, and I went to like a predominantly like Arabic school. And like the culture can be very judgmental sometimes. If you did anything, you were talked about. Your reputation was a big thing and still is in our culture. People care about that extremely.
Just to give more context for the audience. So you said a mostly Arabic school. Could you give us the decade? And then also, are these children of first generation immigrants, second generation immigrants?
I would say it would be like both generations. That was like very fluid in it too. It would have, when I was in high school, it was 2008 to 2012. So yeah, like a little over 10 years ago. And the thing, how I can explain it, it's actually kind of hard to explain unless you are Arabic, because it's just like this understood kind of like thing that like everything is kept a secret or quiet from other people if it's looked to be negative or frowned upon.
Or different in some way.
Or different,
deviant.
Whether you be a part of the queer community, like you don't come out to anyone. You don't, like that's a big thing. And there's a lot of Arab queer people that their parents don't know, or maybe their parents know, but their aunt, uncles, and cousins don't know, you know, like there's a lot of things that get kept in the family type of mentality. So, you know, in high school, I was someone who dated boys. I had slept with boys in high school, you know, different things like that, just kissing, holding hands, you know, anything like that. Or you couldn't even be doing anything physical with them, but if you were alone with a boy, it was still looked as really bad, and you were talked about. So I was bullied a lot in high school for things like that. And I don't regret any of those things. But like, but yeah, that was really hard for me when I was going through high school. So I think like a lot of times when I was getting called names, you know, that just made me feel really ashamed about myself and sexuality, or, you know, whatever decisions I were making.
And Arabic,
Yeah.
Arabic is that's a fluid category. Could you help us understand as
Yeah.
Americans? 'Cause that's just not one country. That's
Hmm.
a collection. Or it's
Yeah.
kind of an area, and then
It's kind of like
there's
an
Islam
umbrella
in
term.
forming
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know like where I'm from in Dearborn Heights, Michigan, you know, saying Arabs or Arabic and things like that, it's like that general umbrella term for Middle Eastern people. As far as like where exactly, I mean, I've like predominantly like a Lebanese, like which I'm half Lebanese. So, but there was like, I mean, like all different types of people, but just like Middle Eastern folk, basically. And then there were a lot of American kids there, and Black kids and Hispanic and things like that too. But predominantly it was Middle Eastern kids.
And
Um,
is there a lot of Islamic influence up front, or is that in the
yeah,
background? Is that most people are practicing Muslim, or?
yeah, I would say that they were very much Muslim. And when you're at that age, as far as the practicing, I mean, they practiced to certain extents. Maybe the elders in their family were more, you know, on top of their religion. But definitely like certain things that they disagreed about, they would reference to Islam. You know, like a lot of folks use the Bible, for example, to like say that you
Enforce a
can't do this. You know,
cultural code.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Well, I bring that up because traditionally, and I don't know to what degree your community was secularized, but traditionally there's very rigid gender categories, very rigid sex categories in
Hmm.
Islamic countries or Arabic countries. So I wonder how the view of a rigid female and a rigid male category influenced your thinking and influenced how you felt between or had to be both, or.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that being being Arab and Lebanese, and I'm half from my father's side, and I didn't have too. They were very Americanized, my father's side, but I didn't really have too much influence of my decision making, or really even just thoughts about being Arabic when it came to my gender and sexuality. Um, I wouldn't say that those would have any influence on me at all. Actually, it just happened to be like the school that I was at during that
Okay.
time. But
Okay.
when it came to family and things like that, that was never anything that I had to personally worry about. If that kind of
Okay.
helps clear it up a little bit.
So,
Yeah.
pardon me if this is too personal, but to what degree was coming out risking your relationships, your family relationships, coming out as lesbian or bisexual?
Um, yeah, it didn't really risk my relationships at all. I have always been looked at by my family as a very mature, level-headed, confident person, very independent, you know. So when I said something, they knew that that was what I meant, and I was sure of it. And um, you know, like they trusted me a lot. They knew that if I had a decision or there was something that I wanted or needed or whatever it was, I was very sure of it. So when I did come out, so like I didn't know how the reaction was going to be, even though I knew how easygoing my family was, and I was still obviously nervous. But it was super smooth. I mean, the first person I came out to was my grandmother in the family, and I just told her, I was like, "So I'm going on a date this weekend," and she was like, "Okay." And it wasn't not common for me to go on dates, and I was like, "But with a girl," and she was like, "Okay." And that was it, like it was
Okay.
very, very easy. I don't speak to my father, and at the time I was not talking to him, so I didn't have to really come out to him. And then my mother, she was going through her own mental health issues at the time, so I don't believe she had the capacity to really understand too much. So it wasn't really that I wasn't accepted. Our communication just was not
Mm-hmm.
there. So even if we did have a conversation, it could have turned negative because of many other things, not because of my sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm trying to, yeah. So that conversation just wasn't well to begin with anyways. But she's 100% behind me with everything now. So there's no worries on my end for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was
So,
very fortunate.
yeah, at 17, you come out and it's more about sexuality and not about gender? Or what's your relationship with gender and sexuality? How do they overlap? Or I think you've given us hints
Yeah.
that they're related in
Yeah, I
relationship to other
mean,
people.
yeah, well, when I was a child, I wore more masculine clothing. All my friends were boys, and once I had gotten into, I would say, seventh grade, um, my mother had always tried to get me to wear girls' clothes, feminine clothing, and I just would always would refuse. When I was in the seventh grade, I had a crush on a boy, and my mom had told me, well, if you want to get his attention, you need to wear girls' clothes and do your hair and all of these things. And for picture day, I looked more feminine than I ever had because I always was wearing my hair in a ponytail and a baggy t-shirt. So when I did, I kind of liked it, and I was getting his attention a little bit more. So that kind of enticed me a little bit. And from seventh grade, I started to become more feminine, and eighth grade a little bit. But I still was, if I was at home, I was wearing basketball shorts and a t-shirt, hair up, like just really lounging around like that. And eighth grade going into high school, I switched schools, and I knew the kids I jumped schools every year pretty much. I changed schools. So I
Oh,
knew them previously from middle school. So I ended up going back and then now going into the high school there. So eighth grade going into my freshman year, I had re-met a friend of mine in fifth grade, and she was extremely feminine. And being around her, even though I was wearing more masculine clothing, she showed me more how to do my hair, how to wear makeup, how to dress, all these things. And then that's when my femininity started to blossom more. So for a long time, until I was about 12 or 13, I was extremely masculine. Um, and once I got into high school and started going through puberty and things, that's when I started to explore my femininity, and I really liked it. Um, once I came out, that's when my masculinity started to come back out again. And that would probably been like 4 or 5 years, later. And when I was exploring that, that's when I was in high school when I cut off all my hair. So I was in my senior year. I just did like a dramatic chop of everything, because no one was believing that I liked women because I dated so many guys. So for me, that was like a way to kind of show my queerness in the only way that I knew how to, given lack of representation. And so once I was getting out of high school, going into college, that's where the shift more so started happening. I started meeting trans people, and then I started to kind of click with them in certain areas and then explore my masculinity even further.
could you expand on that clicking? What synced up between
Yeah,
your experience and theirs, or their personality and yours?
yeah. I think, there wasn't everything that clicked. So I would get like a click with this person from over here and then a click from that person. And then it wouldn't click for this. And, and I just would kind of like sift through all my friends or just online and try and see. A lot of things that I think that clicked for me were the viewing yourself as another gender in childhood. And I think that even though I was a tomboy and at that time, in my mind, I was like, I am a girl, but I like boys things and things like that, was moments like being mistaken for a boy and not correcting them, but not necessarily feeling too uncomfortable with them calling me a boy, but just not really thinking much into it either. And then feeling extremely uncomfortable when I started to grow breasts through puberty. It was like certain moments like that people had talked about that I was like, oh, I really resonate with that. Liking masculine clothing, not liking how the shirt clings to your chest and feeling uncomfortable like that. Like someone just perceiving you and addressing you as this masculine person. When people would say that, I was like, I resonate with that. Like, I like when someone sees my masculinity and things like that. But I never felt the things that never clicked for me were I should have always been born a male, or having dysphoria when it came to bottom surgery. I never had that. So there was bigger things too that I was like, that doesn't really click for me. If that, answers is best.
So the decision to transition was very gradual then. Mm-hmm. And you said that you had more body dysmorphia than gender dysphoria. Could you explain that a little bit more? Was your body something you didn't like and it wasn't just the gender, it was just there's something not right about it? Or
I think I will say that it would probably be both. I just think that the body dysmorphia was probably stronger than the gender dysphoria. So for me, it was, looking in the mirror and just not seeing my body for what it actually was, looking at things and saying like, that looks bigger than this, or, just like looking at my body, thinking I was maybe even heavier than what I was weight-wise, or, just really critiquing and picking out everything about myself. A lot with my curves in my hips, the way that jeans felt, or, things like that. The dysphoria for gender, the thing is that I just really think that I wasn't able to find a way to express my masculinity. And because of my ideas of what it meant to be a masculine person, were very rooted in heterosexual men, cis men, beard, all those things. Like, that was my view of masculinity. So I didn't think or really fully understand that I could still show my masculinity even with looking how I was. But that was because that's how I grew up, and how society perceives masculine people usually. So I think that's what kind of pushed me a little bit more. And then, like the uncomfortableness of like having curves and being associated with a woman's body.
Mm-hmm. Was there something more than just the body in the gender roles? Was there a perception of femininity as something, just for example, weak, open to ridicule from men? Was there something about masculinity that was more free and able to, make more decisions, have more agency in the world? Was there that level of disliking or wanting to be one thing rather than the other in society?
Honestly, I didn't think that much into it. I really didn't. I think I just really felt like how I was viewing myself and how I wanted to be viewed by others. I didn't really think about the social changes until they happened. And I think that's what caused me to want to not the sole purpose, but I think that's one of the things that would have caused me to now detransition. But I never thought about, society as a whole and how they're going to treat me as a male person, because I knew that I was trans and I was born a different way and things like that. But because of how masculine I looked, the way that people perceived me and judged me and treated me, even though I was the same exact person I've always been, like that is what kind of like threw me off a little bit. But I didn't think about that prior. I didn't really register that. I kind of was just more so of like my immediate surrounding of people and how they were perceiving me. I wasn't really thinking of the outside world as much.
Okay. Yeah. And was there something about a man that you wanted? Did you want a beard? Or
I
was it like upper
truly,
body strength kind of thing?
it's really none of that. I like it's really just the energy of my masculinity. And I
Okay.
don't know if that's explaining it well enough for people. And I don't really know how else to explain it. Before I went on hormones, I truly did not think I was going to have a beard. I did not think I was going to get that hairy. My therapist was like, "You're Arabic, like you're going to get that hairy." But I didn't think that because I knew how I looked prior, and I didn't expect my body to masculinize so much. I was very surprised when it masculinized that much. And I think a lot of maybe trans men feel similar before they go on hormones because they see everyone else getting beards and these things, and sometimes people don't. And sometimes you think, well, that's not going to be me. Like, they're lucky. That's why they got that beard. Or, this happened. Or, like, if you are this very feminine looking person, you've never seen yourself as that masculine person. So you can't really imagine it either until it happens.
I'm not terribly well versed in Arabic body types, but from what I know, there's kind of a sexual dimorphism that's pretty strong. There's pretty feminine females and pretty masculine males, especially with, I guess, body hair and a lot of just the different shapes. I can see
Hmm.
there's a big kind of a difference, more or less. Were you kind of aiming for something in the middle? Did you want like a non-binary, just a slightly tweaked, or a less feminine, more masculine, or something in the middle? Is that what you were aiming for in your head?
Um, I feel bad saying that. Like, I feel bad saying this, but like, I didn't, I didn't have a target. I didn't have an aim. I kind of was just, let's see how this goes, and was taking it month by month as I could, with when like, or not even month by month, like change by change. Whatever I started to notice differently about myself, I would keep going. I do know though that when I made the decision, I was with that decision. So I never thought that I would ever go off of hormones. So when I chose to transition, I really truly thought this was it. Like, I'm on hormones now, and this is how I will present for the rest of my life. And I never thought twice about it. It was like just one of those things. I was like, this is my life now, and I went with it. And I didn't really dissect it too much.
Were there
Yeah.
underlying or subsidiary issues of some sort? Anxiety you mentioned, or self-consciousness you mentioned. Was there other turmoils that, in so far as hormones or a transition would allow you to deal with other issues, or was it rooted in self-perception more or less? So like a
If I understand your question correctly, are you asking more so like during the transition, was there anything that like made me uncomfortable or like anxiety about like in this new body? Is that what you're kind of going
I've
towards?
I've spoken with detransitioners that point to other things that they're dealing with, where they
Hmm.
kind of lump everything into dealing with my gender, and transitioning will solve everything else that I'm dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, for me, so I made a YouTube video which thoroughly explains as best as I felt like at that moment I could why I decided to transition and why I decided to detransition. And within those two questions, I had come up with reasons maybe why I decided to go that route. What could have happened in my life what experiences, that could have caused me to go to that decision. And one of the big ones, well, I would say there's two big ones that I thought. One of the reasons that I thought I could have been uncomfortable in my body was because from the age of 5 to 13, I was sexually abused by my father's brother. And that's right when you're going through puberty as well. I had just gotten my period. So all of these things are happening. And when your body is taken from you, and then you're going through puberty on top of that, and you're trying to find yourself in this world, and then right after puberty, you're going through your sexuality, all of these things, like, you could feel extremely uncomfortable in your body. Mm-hmm. And so could I say that led to that? It could have, Another thing is I was going through a lot of trauma when I went to, it was trauma after trauma, one after another up until transitioning. And so so it was sexually abused until 13. And then I had come out as gay at, I would say probably 16. 17, then I'm like trying to also start to figure out my gender a little bit. Right when I was 17, my mother had gone through an addiction that ended up lasting 8 years. At 18, I'm going to university and college and living on my own for the first time. 19, I meet my first real adult queer relationship partner who I move in with, first time things. And then go through an immense heartbreak of a breakup. And all of those things just kept happening one after another. Where did transitioning and starting a new life look very enticing to me? It did, being able to kind of recreate myself, pick myself up from the ashes basically, and kind of say, this is who I am, find an identity and feel good about that. That could have also led to my decision making. And could I have dissociated a little bit when it came to all of those traumas and kind of created, yes, Issa as this new identity and new life and, and all of these things. Like, there are so many things that we can say that would have led up to all of my decisions. But ultimately, I tried to make the best decision given all of those complex moments, So, yeah. Did that answer it?
You brought up a lot.
I did bring up a lot. I'm sorry. I brought up a
lot. No, not at all.
I have a lot that's the thing, is I have a lot in my life. Like, at the age of 27, for all of the things that I've gone through and things that have happened to me, it's a lot. Like, it's extremely overwhelming. And so you could see why I was struggling so much as a young adult trying to discover myself, because think of anyone in general, that's such a difficult time. And so it's like, now let's add all of these other traumas on top of it, so it was very overwhelming.
What was supplementing to the hormones? Did you begin to train yourself? You said there's some sort of energy, like a masculine as opposed to feminine energy. I really jive with that. I really understand that. That's how I really conceive of gender. Did you do a lot of production in this new person where you kind of figured out different gestures, have to remap how you spoke more masculinely and, and then respond to how people are confused, maybe not reading you correctly? What supplemented the hormones in your transition?
Yeah, I said earlier, I felt like my masculinity was very performative. So
does that mean inauthentic, or does that mean, what do you mean by performative?
I would say authentic, but still, paying closely attention to maybe my mannerisms and how I say things. Just paying more attention, maybe shifting some things. Like, you could think of this is a great example, which me saying this, I'm hoping that someone else can also resonate with this, but the way you cross your legs. That was, if I went to go just cross them over instead of just putting my ankle on my knee is a more masculine stance, so I would be more conscious of these things. People would say that when I first get introduced to someone, I'm very masculine. I'm very,
Straightforward, forthright.
straightforward. Yeah, all of that, And then when you get to know me, that's when I start to be what they would say is a little bit more flamboyant. But that was just natural to me, the way that I move my hands and I talk, and I've always talked like this, and so that could be seen as a little bit more feminine. But there was always like a notice of when I first met someone until when they got to know me, or maybe if I just felt comfortable with them off the bat. There was always that kind of like performative, but it was subconscious. I didn't really know that I was doing it sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you began the transition path, did your relationship to the mirror that you carry around yourself, the focus on yourself, did that get turned up? Did it become
It's
greater, or
actually
did it
got turned
subside?
down.
Okay, so it subsided.
It turned, but I think I would like to say that maybe a big reason of that is because men aren't pressured as much as women when it comes to their body. And I think that men and women definitely do have pressure in both ways, like especially when it comes to being like this masculine person, having muscles and the beard, and things like that. And when it came to just like how I dressed every day and how I did my hair, I still very much was looking in the mirror a lot and making sure that I looked well kept. But when it came to maybe my stomach or my hips or things like that, as I was on testosterone more and more and my body changed, and chest surgery relieved an immense amount of discomfort for me. It was a little bit easier to look in the mirror but I also, to the level that I take care of myself as a feminine person and the level of what I take care of myself as a masculine person, I mean, the femininity is up here and the masculinity was down here. And you could have put that into many ways, like even to the point of just taking vitamins every day. I just really stopped taking care of myself when I viewed myself as this masculine person, because masculine people don't really take care of themselves like that, right? But because I had grown, like that's the idea usually, I think society would have, especially about like younger men and things like that. So I still very much looked in the mirror, but not as in the same way. I kind of started to accept myself a lot, but the turn was now like I didn't like the extreme masculinity, and the extreme masculinity for me was the hair, and like within like on my body and my beard, and then the thinning of the hair. And then
did that kick in pretty quickly and pretty strongly, or did it
I
just
would
ramp
say
up?
at about 2 years was when like I really had like a full beard and hair started growing on my body. At 2 years to my 5-year mark, I was extremely uncomfortable and depressed.
Okay.
I had a lot of gender euphoria prior to that. And I think like for the first year, I mean, I was still very androgynous, that first year on hormones. And then the 1 year to 2 year, that's when the beard really started growing in. And I was just like, okay. And then from 2 years to 5 years, I mean, my masculinity, I mean, skyrocketed. Like my beard, like it just was even more and more. And I just further felt uncomfortable in my body to the point where I was just like not taking care of it, not eating healthy. Yeah, just doing a lot of self-destructive behavior. And I will say this too, because I was only dealing with my gender and sexuality. I hadn't at that time healed from my traumas from when I was a child. So it was kind of like at the 2-year mark, I didn't have to worry about all my trans stuff. I'd got my name changed. I got surgery. I've already been on hormones. I'd done the checklist. So now that the checklist is done and I don't have other things preoccupying my mind of all these things that I have to do, now I'm sitting with my feelings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how did testosterone affect your emotional palette? How did it rearrange your feelings? And then how did that go on to inform that later half of your transition?
Yeah. I mean, testosterone, blocks you a little bit from like crying or, I wouldn't say empathy so much for me because I care a lot about certain things and relationships and people and friends and stuff. Um, but the way that I handled my emotions was a little bit of a wall up a little bit more. Um, and it was like, I always remember saying like I could feel my anger in my chest and it felt like a blockage and I couldn't really release it as quickly as I would have liked to. And definitely like crying helps release those emotions. And I wasn't able to kind of like cry as much as I do now, being like off of hormones and having estrogen in my body.
Mm-hmm. You can cry upon
Yeah.
command now? Is this
I probably cry every morning. Just like very special, beautiful things about life. But I
mm,
think I also, because of all of the experience that I had in the last 5 years,
mm,
I now view myself in the world and life completely differently. And so I see a lot of the beautiful things in life and the beautiful things about myself and who I am instead of feeling so shameful
okay.
about all of
Yeah.
my experiences and decisions. Yeah, so also having estrogen that helps to release those emotions. So they're just a little bit easier for me to release. Yeah.
That leads to a question that I've been wanting to ask. While you're going through, you're coming out, you're going off to college, then you're working through this gender and then transition thing. What are you doing in the world? Like, what's your business? What are you studying? What are you putting your
hmm
attention to outside of yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I had said, I had been working as a server and bartender
Okay.
and a barista during all that time. I was going on and off to Eastern Michigan University, trying to figure out what I wanted to major in.
Did
Very
you have any
preoccupied.
leads? Anything that you
I
were
mean,
interested in?
I would think about something and I would say, oh, this could be what I would want to do. I would start it and I wouldn't finish it because I'd be like, I hate it. I'm miserable. I'm not enjoying this. So that, kept happening for the last 10 years.
So you kept on moving schools
Well, I
after.
was still at Eastern. I just went on and off. I
Yeah.
would like go back and then, and try something and then decide, okay, I'm not going to go this semester.
Yeah.
Um, and just preoccupied by my friends,
Okay.
fear of missing out on going to the bars and I wasn't thinking about future stuff. Like I was just thinking about that weekend, what was going on with the people that I worked with, like just very like chaotic, dramatic, partying type of like early 20-year-old
Hmm.
stuff.
Just to contrast it with another earlier generation, you weren't super online then. It sounds like you were very active in your body, being social. Okay, let me rephrase that. To what degree were you online, and to what degree did that inform you?
Yeah. So Tumblr was a thing when I was 17. So that was where I got a lot of my um, information about trans stuff. Um, YouTube, like that was like the start of it. So that would have been in 2012.
Mm.
Uh, During my transition, Instagram, all of that, and I started connecting with a lot of people without the outline or online, but social things. That's when the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference was going on every year. It's kind of like so it's in Philadelphia. It's a
Hmm.
conference. They have a bunch of like workshops and booths and things like that for anyone who identifies under the trans umbrella. You can go to. It's a free event every year, and that was like a really cool way to network with a lot of people and stuff like that. So that was like keeping me online as well. And then during that time, I was doing my documentary, so I was trying to socialize as much as I could with everyone and putting my content out there
Hmm.
throughout the years from there. Um,
So
but
you
yeah,
had a creative outlet or a creative project, and that
I
was
did.
tied to your identity. That was
Yes.
linked to it. Okay.
hmm
And then as you progress through transition, how does your connection to the outside world change? You said something to the effect that after 2 years, you'd done all the checklists, or you went down the map to a certain degree, and then you were
Hmm.
left with your feelings. At that point, how was your relationship to the outside world and your connection to?
Are you saying like regarding of like my gender and like how people were perceiving me then?
Just in general, when you start to get, you mentioned earlier after the 2 year mark,
Hmm.
you started having to sit with your depression. You stopped taking care of
Yeah.
yourself. It seems like you kind of entered into a depressive state. I'm just wondering, to what degree did that inform your relationship to the outside world? Was that still kind of steady?
Um, yeah, like I'm hoping I'm understanding your question correctly. I I feel like that side of me of like the depression and self-destructive and all that was very hidden from like how I
Okay.
was maybe presenting to other people. I tried to be as authentic as I could when it came to expressing that side of myself because I knew that I wasn't the only one that would probably be feeling that way with their transition. Um, and it was very I felt very shameful about my self-destructive actions or the depression that I had around my gender and gender expression because I made this documentary. I told everyone who I was, all of those feelings. So I didn't want to seem like I didn't want that to be a way to invalidate me being trans if I was questioning it or so I just was like, this is what I'm doing, you
Okay.
know?
Yeah.
And still was, I would say I was still figuring out those feelings. I didn't have the words necessarily for it just yet.
What began to start to give you definite words or concepts about detransitioning?
Yeah, I would say, so I do want to note this, like, so from the 2 year to 5 year mark, right? There were things and ways that I felt that I didn't understand why I felt that way or why I was doing certain behaviors and being ashamed of it. And I do want to talk about those behaviors and things. And I'm a very fluid person, sexuality wise as well. I like masculine and feminine people. And as this masculine person and being perceived as male and sleeping with men, which obviously they would perceive me as male, I felt uncomfortable with that. So a lot of times there would be role playing as this more feminine person in a lot of my sexual relationships. And I felt very ashamed of that because I was like, well, that's not who I am in my day to day. And it was confusing to me. Why would I want to be in this feminine role? And I kept thinking it was maybe this like inner homophobia for myself that I didn't want to be in this gay male relationship. And that wasn't it at all. I just didn't see myself as a gay male. And I didn't see myself as a male person. But I didn't know at that moment I didn't see myself as a male person because that is what I became. And that is how people address me because society likes to stick to the binary. So I didn't really understand what gender fluid was because I was like, no, I look like this. And so for those 3 years of being extremely depressed and uncomfortable in my body, again, not knowing why I was uncomfortable in my masculinity, not like being how I was perceived by men and women. Um, yeah, like that, like those were big things for me, but I didn't have the words or understand what that meant because I was like, well, why? Well, I am looked at as a guy and I do like sleeping with men. So why am I unhappy that they're treating me like a man? You know, and I didn't really understand that. Um, and so when it got to the point of me deciding to detransition, I never thought it was possible. In those 3 years, I never thought it was possible. I had looked up to the extent that I could look up online of what that was. And there was no one that looked as masculine as I did. There was no one that had gone through the procedure that I had gone through just yet. Like there was no representation for me. And when I saw other people, maybe they were only on hormones a couple years, they got masculine, but not to the extent that I did. And so their changes, they like, if they talked about it, it was just not in depth. And it wasn't, for me, like, appearance is very important. I needed to see pictures. I needed to see what, like how when you transition from female to male or male to female, there's all of these photos, there's all this representation. You can see how someone is changing. That wasn't there. And so, and because I made the decision to do that, I never thought that I could change that decision. And so when the pandemic hit last summer, that's when everything changed for me. And I basically, when everything was closed down, I was still in my depression. So for a month into everything being closed down, losing my job, not being on unemployment yet, all of those things, I mean, I was eating a ton of food. Like, I was binge eating. I was just watching mindless things on the computer. I was smoking a lot of weed in an unhealthy way, and sleeping constantly. And at that time, a year ago, I had gotten to my heaviest. I was 170 pounds. And for me, that was really heavy. And it was really bad. Like, I got to a point where I couldn't see my future and I didn't want to see it. And one day I just was like, I can't allow myself to feel like this anymore. Like, I just got so dark and deep into the hole that I was like, I either change whatever I have to do to change to never feel like this again, or like, I'm not living anymore. And one day, well, I had started getting into very, very little microdosing psilocybin. I got really interested in that. And I only had like a tea. It was like this ginger lemon tea. I think it was like 375 milligrams, something so small. And I wanted to look into it for depression and addiction and PTSD. That was my main focus of why I wanted to try this. And I heard an amazing research and reviews on it. And I was like, let me try this. And I did. And for the first time, I kind of like, it felt like I stepped outside of my body and was looking at myself and just realized like more about like I'm this extremely complex human who had gone through all of these extremely complex experiences, and I can make whatever I can make my reality just like I always have. It felt kind of like this, I found the key, and unlocked all of these secrets, like, about the world of like how like I can actually do whatever I want that makes me happy, and I can make myself happy, and I can cultivate the beautiful life that I want to cultivate. And I never thought that that was possible. I felt like I was stuck in this certain life that I had. And I would say it was probably about a couple of weeks after I had first started trying it. I went into my grandparents' bathroom. And I had lived with my grandparents when I was like 16, 17 and moved out on my own. And when I was living back with them again and I didn't have work, I didn't have school, I didn't have anything, it felt like I was 16 again in the summer at my grandparents' house. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I just like, the word dissociation popped up in my head. I didn't know what that word meant. I didn't like, I never looked at like nothing. It just popped up in my head. And I was like, why did I think of that word? And I looked it up and I was like, oh my God. I was like, what if I dissociated and created this new life, Issa, because of all of the things that I went through. And I do want to note, I also, with psilocybin, I did some hypnotherapy for some inner child work that summer as well. I really wanted to work on myself. So that kind of healed my inner child a lot with all of the things. Like, I was able to forgive and accept and just process all of that finally. And I think that's what kind of released for me to come to the terms that, oh, I don't have to be on hormones for the rest of my life. I don't have to look like this to the world and be ashamed when I present this feminine person, you know, in the dark in these sexual experiences, which were creating more horrible sexual habits of myself, you know, like, and so it was like being able to say, like, I don't have to continue this route was life-saving for me.
And was there, I might be getting ahead of things, but was there any social implications for going back, for detransitioning that you were worried about?
I mean, of course, you know, whenever you make a big decision that isn't the norm, like, you're going to worry about what everyone's thinking. So just like I did when I transitioned, I definitely thought that when I was detransitioning. I did think, you know, are people going to invalidate my trans experience? Are people going to say my documentary was all a lie? Or, you know, I mean, I had this social presence on Instagram and starting to be on TikTok and things like that. And I was like, I don't want people to think that I was lying, or, you know, but I also, when I decided that I was going to go off of hormones, I had actually met someone in August who was a femme presenting person, and we got in a relationship, and I thought it was going to go another way than it did. And I went back on hormones for 4 months. And this is where and then when we broke up, this is where I finally realized, oh, I'm using my happiness like from my relationships, and I'm basing my identity on my relationships because of what I was so used to knowing of how I grew up, like being a masculine person with a feminine person, a man and a woman. This idea of like what that relationship should look like was what I was so used to. And I finally realized, oh my God, I have been doing this my whole life. And so I needed that relationship and breakup to realize that I was basing my gender identity and expression, like some of it, on my partnerships and that perception of when people see us on the street or you know, or whatever it was. And then I decided to go off hormones again. But I was worried about it because, you know, like I said, but I ultimately just got to this part of my life where I was like, I don't care anymore. Like, if I had to live, I basically asked myself this question that really helped me was, if I died tomorrow and tomorrow I can express my gender however I want to, would I do it in a masculine expression or would I do it in a feminine one? And I knew the answer, and that was femininity for me. I had missed it so much, and I felt like I had suppressed my femininity so much because I felt like I needed to prove my masculinity. And to be honest, people knew me as the person that you see today in this feminine experience majority of my life. And they've only seen me in this masculine appearance for only 6 years of my life. And as much as it might be a surprise for a lot of people, for the people who have known me my whole life, it's not. And that was what I was scared of too, was that I was thinking about the people that I had met on my trans journey. I was worrying about them. And I was like, that I don't need to be doing that. I know the good things that I've done for the community, and I still believe in those things, and I still support everyone in their decisions. So just because I'm deciding to express my gender a little differently, like, that doesn't mean that all of that was BS, you know?
How do you think that, what's the state of the trans community's attitude, broadly speaking, if you feel comfortable saying this, towards detransition? And what do you think would be the proper way for detransition to be accepted or noticed in the LGBT community? Because it seems to be, materially, it is a growing faction. There are more and more detransitioners. So what would you like to have out there for information? And how do you think the acceptance of that, does it exist yet? Is it still unknown? Is there resistance?
I'm hoping that, like, when people see my journey, they kind of break that ideology up a little bit, because I I think that whoever wants to do whatever they want to do in their life, as long as it's not harming anyone else, you do that. Everyone modifies their body in so many ways that who am I to judge what anyone is going to do? The one thing that I find when it comes to the trans community and people who are detransitioning, there is a lot of negativity around it. And I think because people think that if someone's detransitioning, they regret their transition. And for me personally, that is not the case at all. I don't regret that transition because I wouldn't have made the decision that I made to detransition if I didn't go through that. And I loved my experience being this trans male person too. I met a lot of amazing people. My masculinity was explored how I needed to explore it to know what was the middle that I needed for that. I learned so much about myself. To be able to be in a world and experience it as a feminine person and a masculine person. I mean, think of the knowledge and interactions and experiences that you get from something like that, that no one or just a few people can say that they had. And I think that's really awesome and really beautiful. So there's no regrets because if you're making a decision and it's positive, just because it changes doesn't mean that you need to regret it. That's what life is. You're making decisions based on your happiness and what you think that you need or want to get to that next level. And life is just a continuous learning process and you're continuously evolving. I mean, every 10 years, you're not the same person that you've been, and that could be to a different extent for each person. The other thing that I do want to kind of add to that when it comes to the community in general as well is, I mean, I do get comments on, like, for example, I'm very active on TikTok, and I'll get a lot of comments that say, like, thank God you're not a TERF. And it's trans exclusionary radical feminist.
Radical feminist, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and I never really knew that term prior to that. But I hate that comment because that's someone assuming that that is what I was going to be because of detransitioning. So they're using this term and generalizing it to people who maybe have a same experience, but it's so complex. I mean, not everyone's experience is the same. So how could you say that just because someone detransitions, this is what they are? And I think I have found some people who have detransitioned, like I said, who regret their transition, who are unhappy with their body again. They're as far as like their surgeries and things like that. And of course, we're all going to feel uncomfortable about those things. But they feel ashamed that they were viewed as a masculine person, you know, and all these things. And then go back to identifying usually heavily as a cis female feminine person. And for me, from transitioning and then wanting to detransition, it completely evolved my view on gender, where I don't feel like a woman and I don't feel like a man. I just feel like this human. And so now the way that I view my gender, even though I present feminine, is I'm trying to kind of like break that up because I don't necessarily regret my top surgery. The only thing I regret is that I got the surgery to look like a male chest instead of like maybe a more neutral chest. Like I am happy that I got a reduction. I did not like my large breasts. So there's differences that I feel to other people who have detransitioned. And I think that I will say this, and the audience can take what they will from that. But I think that when I transitioned, I thought I was like, wow, I really like have understood like gender and it's so complex and all of these things. But I was so stuck in the binary and the fluidity, I would, like I said, I suppressed my femininity, all these things. I still had that very like heteronormative idea of being trans. And I think that when you kind of break that up, and then start to kind of like go into your fluidity, like that's where you really have kind of like evolved. And so I just find that sometimes, which is totally okay to be in the binary, I just find that sometimes the hate for their bodies on both ways, and now I don't even feel the hate. Like now I just look at my body and I love and accept it for exactly what it is. If that makes sense.
It seems, I think you pointed to it through your microdosing experiences, but it seems like your philosophy is shifted on a deeper level than just beyond gender. Like you broke through gender.
Yeah.
Sorry, it seems like gender, you were using gender as a kind of a spiritual exercise to figure out reality and your ontology and your existential, level of interacting with the world. It seems like you broke through it to another level. Am I sensing something correctly? Is there something deeper beyond that you've that you've been guided to, or that's shifted for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that like 100%. It really, I mean, it really just changed my view about the world and who I am in it. And what humans are capable of. And then, yeah, more into the bigger picture, like of, I think I would say that I became an even more spiritual person. As far as like a person in the universe, like there's so much more out there. There's so many, I don't know. I started to really see how everything connects and how moments and experiences can be patterns, and really seeing and listening to signs, and looking at maybe my thoughts not necessarily as my own, but as signs and hints to deeper meaning of things. I'm an extremely intuitive person, and healing all of that part, all of those pieces of myself has just helped me just be more in tune with, like, I would say, like, my humanness and my soul more than my gender identity, my sexuality, my labels, my identity, like, all of that. Like, I kind of just have just taken all of that away and just more so like enjoying life just for like the human experience. It could be a weird way to look at it, but
I appreciate that. That resonates with me. What about the mirror? How's your relationship with the mirror?
Yeah. I would say that, like, I look at myself and I feel like an overwhelming feeling of love for the person in that reflection. And I'm not looking at the appearance so much. Obviously I do. But it's more about when I look at myself, I had said this before, kind of like, I think now, and I think this could from my hypnotherapy sessions and how to view myself and past me, kind of like in this like cradling, like I'm holding that person and saying, like, you've been through a lot, like, you're an amazing person, you're a beautiful soul, you're this thing. And I look at myself with so much care now and so much respect. So when I look at that reflection in the mirror, it's not about looks anymore. It's more about who I am and appreciating my life and the person in that mirror, if that can kind of explain it.
If you can bring that into your work while you have that man or woman in the barber shop chair, being able to see them and recognizing them while you're dealing with their hair could be a great gift that you give people. If you can translate the care that you give to yourself to other people, I can see how that would just be a really awesome experience for many people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have been trying to practice making people see the beautiful aspects of themselves. And obviously appearance is like a huge thing. So it's like, why didn't I go to barber school sooner? But I do like making people feel good about themselves, because I think that in our day-to-day, we are constantly putting ourselves down, and in any ways, but also putting ourselves down for even wanting to look better, like whether that be with the surgery or whether that be with the hormone. But I think, like there's just so many pressures from society that it's hard to just say, like, never look at something of yourself that's bad, because you will always think that maybe my my right eye looks bigger than the left, or, whatever it is, so you will always want to modify yourself in some way. And also learning that you don't need to be ashamed of that either. If it's going to make you feel good, that's okay. So just kind of trying to like let people take care of themselves how they want to take care of themselves, but without the pressures of what everyone is thinking about, just what they want. So I try and translate that, not even just with my, some of the clients that I've had and my future clients, but even with my classmates, giving them a better idea of who they are in this world, and that they can achieve a lot. And yeah, and we're all very unique and complex people. Yeah.
So on the production side, for interested internet citizens, what are you putting out? You have a TikTok. Do you do frequent YouTube videos? Do you plan anything more in those domains? And how can people get in contact with your work in that fashion?
Yeah. So I have my TikTok account. The username is Issa, Issa X Ismail, Ismail. It is the same thing for my Instagram as well. I post more on TikTok than I do Instagram because I'm not going anywhere. So I'm not just taking photos of myself all the time, but the videos are a lot of fun for me to do. As far as YouTube, you could just search my name. I'll pop up. I've only made 2 videos so far. I thought about documenting it like I did my transition, but I found that preoccupied too much time while I was going through this very emotional, transformative period of my life. And I didn't get to fully process a lot of that.
Yeah,
and I didn't get to sit with it, my feelings, too much, because I was so on the go and worried about what I was going to put out there. I stopped hormones on February 1st of this year. So going on 4 months now. So I've only had 2 videos out. I plan to kind of like do updates on YouTube, just when I feel like there's some information that I need to share, whether it be emotional or physical. But as much as I enjoy being on social media, I sometimes just feel like it could be really toxic for me. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Because as much as I'm not trying to compare myself to all of my peers, social media does influence that a lot. But I think TikTok is a really amazing platform, and has really like made the human consciousness in the world like kind of rise a little bit, because now we're getting access to a lot of people's thoughts that we wouldn't normally have access to. And you can think of that in the sense of when there was just maybe MySpace or there was just maybe Facebook, you're connecting with only your people immediately around you, whether you work with them, whether you're friends, your family. So usually everyone has kind of the same idea as you, and then you add more friends and you might see articles here and there. But with TikTok and the For You page, I mean, they're just shooting videos out at you like from all over, whether it's something that you agree with and it's your kind of like ideas of life or, whatever it is, or it's a new idea or perspective you've never even heard of or saw. So it's really helping people see like how things are in so many different places, or how people think, or the things that they do, So I'm really enjoying that aspect of that platform specifically, because it's constantly opening up my mind, and I'm sure others, to other lives, and just, so I think that's really cool. But that would probably be like the only social media platform that I'm like very much on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has there been any form of withdrawal, or do you miss the testosterone being off of that? Is there like a ache in your heart?
No, I do not miss testosterone one bit. I have never been, and I didn't mean to cut you off when I said that, but I was like, I'm so happy that I'm off of hormones. There's a couple of things. People can tell you what hormones are going to be like. People are going to tell you what you're going to look like. People could tell you all about your journey, whatever, because they've seen so many.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that you won't believe them. You're just not going to really realize it or know until you do it. And you can put that for anything in life, like you have to go through something yourself to realize a lot of things. And it took me that to realize that hormones are a very strong drug, whether it be estrogen or testosterone. And it can change a lot of parts of you, whether you like it or you don't. And I also am not a person that likes to be on medication, unless I absolutely have to. And I had said this in a video, at this point in my life, I absolutely did not have to be on testosterone anymore. That wasn't a life-saving medication for me anymore. And so I didn't need to prioritize that. And the first time I went off last summer for a couple of months before I went back on, it was a little intense for me, the mood swings, because I had been on testosterone for almost 6 years at that point. So a harsh cutoff, kind of made my mood swings, but also doing a lot of, self-work. It was just an overwhelming time in general. When I decided to go off the second time, it's been a smooth transition. And I feel just more like myself. And I used to kind of dissociate a little bit when I was presenting masculine how I was, to the point where I felt like I was in a bodysuit. And I just felt very disconnected from my body. And now, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm very present. And it's never felt like me like it does now. But that's, I don't think necessarily because of my expression. I think it's just because of my views now of who I am in the world and how I can live my life with no limitations. And that's making me feel a little bit freer and more connected to this body that I'm in. Yeah.
Thank you so much for allowing me to hear your story firsthand.
Yeah. I have not done a interview style like this.
Ever?
Ever. No.
You're pretty good at it.
I appreciate that. I think that I thoroughly explain my feelings. I think I explain them in a little bit more complex ways that not everyone sees that perspective. But when I do say it, then they understand a little bit better, of like how it's not just this like very surface level. Like there's so many deep layers of transitioning and detransitioning and the feelings that go with it. But I think I also wanted to be able to tell my story in a way that I could so many a times. That's why I did the documentary and such, that I wasn't as, like, I was a little hesitant to pick who I would talk to about this kind of thing. And when you reached out, I looked through your YouTube page and I saw Buck Angel. Right? I started watching a little bit of it, and I just really liked how you gave him the space to kind of really share his feelings, and so I didn't feel like you had directed him or guided him into maybe like certain things to say or imply things about his life. You really gave him the space to kind of like explain his feelings. And like, I felt comfortable to be able to correct you, or not even correct you. When you asked the question, I was kind of just like, I actually didn't think about that, like I didn't feel persuaded to have to like kind of come up with some answer to something. And I just didn't have an answer for it, so I really appreciate that as well.
Well, it's my channel, but it's your show.
Right. I love that.
Congratulations for reaching the end of the discussion. If you enjoyed it, do be sure to leave a review or a comment or a thumbs up or whatever you need to do to show that glorious algorithm that this is some good stuff. And do be sure to go and check that back catalog, as it is brimming full of fantastic conversations. Links to provide monetary support are down there in the description as well. Have a good night.